Welcome back to the program. We are joined today by Alastair Crooke, a former British and EU diplomat, who also does excellent writing on his Substack, Conflicts Forum, and I will make sure to leave a link in the description. So thank you for coming on, and it seems that the early strategic thinking of the Trump administration was that it was necessary to improve ties with Russia to prevent it from drifting too far towards China. So essentially pacify the Russians so they could instead focusing on countering the economic war with China. Uh, this plan seems to have derailed to some point as Trump is undermining the bilateral relations with Russia with sanctions and various military threats. Meanwhile, China seems to be winning some of this tech war and financial war. So, but I thought a good place to start might be Russia, though. That is, as we see, Trump has stepped up pressure with these sanctions, which seem to go against the main purpose. I thought it was to make bilateral relations free from the Ukraine war. Instead, it appears to become hostage to it. But how significant do you see these sanctions actually as being?
Well, let's go back a step. And you said, that he wanted to have some relations with Russia. Um, the question is, what was the intent? I mean, did he really want normalized relations with Russia? Would that have been, was that even vaguely possible to sell to his sort of big donors, who largely seem to control him in the foreign policy sphere, at least? These big donors are really adamantly opposed to normalization with Russia for two reasons, I think. One is because they want the United States to remain militarily strong. I mean, in the sense, not necessarily to be spread everywhere, but to have, if you like, the latitude to operate openly as they want, when they want, without much concern about sovereignty or norms or jurisdiction. We've seen that in Venezuela pretty clearly. I think that there was an idea that it would be possible because we saw also that Trump was saying from an early on, I mean, Russia, and I know Russia. I know Russia, and Russia was dying to do business with us. Now, I don't know if he believes it or not. It doesn't really matter. But I think really the whole purpose of this was to pull Russia not only out of the alliance with China, but also to weaken the BRICS. I mean, it's very, very clear that, actually undermining the BRICS is a platform, a central platform of Washington at this time. He's made that unmistakable, is to disrupt and weaken the BRICS. So removing Russia, which is its sort of central pivot, would be extremely important. It can be seen as part of, the isolation of China, because of course this is also the road and belt on which China has staked a lot in terms of investment, but also as its debt, its market. As Europe and America no longer is a market for China, they're moving to Central Asia and to the Belt and Road as furnishing this. And it is probably, I mean, the most attractive. If you were asked a few years ago, where would you do business? Everyone would say automatically the United States, of course, because, it's got technology and it's innovative and it's sort of growth oriented. I don't think they say that today. I don't think they say that at all. In fact, the United States does not see as necessarily the best place to do business. It's become too uncertain, too difficult to predict what is going to happen. And generally, I think people say if you want to do business, a place to go it is going to be the Central region, which is growing like anything, and with the infrastructure that China is putting in, and also it is helping it because China is laying down not only train lines and roads, it's laying down its digital superhighway for transactions outside of the dollar sphere and back to China through their bridge structure. It's no longer called M-Bridge, it's called the bridge structure now, which is direct central bank to central bank digital exchange. And there are several companies already involved in it. So I would say that, the trading in Central Asia is increasingly important. And you see now that there's been a big shift that China has started giving panda bonds, but bonds issued in yuan, in digital yuan or sovereign yuan, for companies. Not only Russian companies, Russian is floating, if you like, bonds on the panda bonds on the Chinese exchanges to finance their oil and gas industries. But even European countries like Hungary have been raising money on the Chinese market. Of course, it's not as big as the American bond market, which I think is about 30 odd billion and is the size of it. But it's 20 billion. So it's not so, it's not so tiny. People keep saying, well, the market's so small. Well, yes, it was, but it's growing quite rapidly in this time. So, there is, if you like, an interest in doing it. So I think all in all, we have to question really whether that was ever the intent of Trump to do that, or was it simply about trying to entice him into a ceasefire, into a trap that would, if you like, then allow NATO and America and Trump to declare at least a holding victory, even if Ukraine collapses militarily in this period. I mean, if they had got a frozen conflict, I don't think that's possible now. But if they got a frozen conflict, America could say, well, look, the narrative. I mean, this war has been eating away at Russia's economic system. It's impoverishing it all the time. The labor problems, there are all sorts of problems. And so, yes, it's not an immediate victory, but it's going to be a victory 2 or 3 years later when the economic pressures have mounted to their maximum. And who knows, they may be even sufficient to push out Putin, and then allow us to dip our hands into the oil and resource base of Russia like we did in the 90s.
So you see this, the early talk, which you heard from people like Marco Rubio, that the US recognized the world was more multipolar. Do you see this being more a deceit in terms of seeking to restore the global primacy? And well, how do you expect the United States to continue the approach towards Russia from now on? Because as we see along the front lines, things are going very badly for Ukraine. So the whole if the tactic was to lure the Russians into an unfavorable peace or hand over all responsibility to the Europeans, a lot of options appear to be disappearing now that things are falling apart.
Precisely, you have that. That's exactly right. Yeah, but your first part of the question about Rubio was the multipolar order just a gimmick. Um, I think at that stage when they said that, which was really just after the inauguration when he said that, I think he said it during his confirmation hearing. Um, uh, I think there was a sense then of much more of a global game Team Trump was planning, that it was not only going to change the Middle East, change the Western Hemisphere, but, it was going to be a larger gain. And I think they are now sort of wiser and slightly poorer as a consequence from this experience, because, as you know, you've been following it for long. I mean, they haven't got they wanted in with Russia. They wanted the frozen conflict, the structure that would allow them to claim it was a victory, and then the Europeans would dive in behind the Dnieper River and start rearming Ukraine for round two in a few years' time. Well, that's not going to happen because Trump was told no. It was quite clear that he was starting to go down. He'd actually changed, and before the Budapest supposed summit, he was talking about a ceasefire on the frozen contract line, even though Putin has told Witkoff umpteen times, I'm sure he's told him, because this was the position that Putin took in June 24 at the foreign ministry. He laid out exactly what was online. They made always absolutely clear, we will not accept it, and they will not accept it for very good reason, because they've been done that. They've been deceived by the West before. Minsk. They don't want another Minsk. It's not they. It is the Russian people. When I was in St. Petersburg, a little time ago, I found, how the mood has changed. St. Petersburg is liberal capital of Russia. And I think more or less everyone accepts Russia has given blood to get to where they are now. They're soldiers, they're sons of blood. And they are not going to accept a new sort of compromise, a weak compromise. That actually what that means is that some of this blood has been expended wastefully, because they will have to spend it again in 2 or 3 years' time. And what is more, then they will have to spend even more after the Europeans have, if you like, remilitarized Ukraine and put in more nationwide Ukraine in the aftermath. And they're not prepared to see that the waste of blood like that. So most Russians accept it. Of course, there are debates about what is the right tactic on the ground, what is the best way. I mean, should Putin go all out and smash the energy system? Should he just trout them on the ground? Whatever. But that we're not really in a position to judge that. I mean, that's a complicated. You have to be on the ground to be really able to judge, what is the best way forward. So yeah, there are valid discussions about what is the right way of bringing about an end to the war, faster, slower, wider, narrower, all these things. This is normal. Nothing surprising about that. But that's where we are. We're waiting now for that war to end. So we'll see. Now, the question I think you didn't ask, but is material in this, is what is going to be the consequence of these 3 elections and the 4th one, which was, if you like, a referendum on a redistricting in California that have come up. And it is a sort of firing gun on the midterms. The starting gun on the midterms is being shot. What might that mean for the next period? I think, first of all, to understand it, I mean, not going to dive into American politics, but to understand it, probably the best way to understand it is what happened in the UK. There was a very unpopular government, conservative government, in the UK, and people heartily disliked it. hated it. And so at the last general election, they wanted to slap it, and they did. They slapped it very much. But the only problem was, what do you do? Who do you vote for? They didn't really like any of the other sort of parties particularly, um, but they had to vote for someone to give that slap to the Conservatives. So they did, and now they find they have, and now another unpopular government in consequence of that. So what I'm saying is there was sort of a double disillusion with one party, disillusion with the other party. And I think some of that is what you saw in America. How will Trump react to this? Well, I think from what we know, he's not likely to back down. It's not been his style. It's more likely that he will double down. And I think that therefore we can expect escalation in this period. His economic situation is pretty uncertain, unstable. I mean, there's the debate in the Supreme Court about the constitutionality of his tariffs. There's the AI bubble, maybe sort of slowly dissipating or letting out air. And there is the structural problem, which is really acute. It was all summed up in a graph recently that I saw. And you have on one hand these sort of almost vertically moving S&P valuations going in one way and job openings heading in the other direction. That is not good news for Trump or for MAGA. I mean, very serious. And the crossover seemingly took place at a time when the launch of AI GPT tool. Is it that the American big AI companies believe that AI is going to lead to huge job replacement? Seems to be what they are suggesting. I mean, they say very clearly that this level of investment, billions upon billions, for big structures, can only produce revenues and profits with big job losses, with big job replacement by AI. Yet on the other hand, many of the surveys that have come up, the MIT survey, says that AI isn't working, and most companies have had zero effect from it. So we're left with this question. I mean, have the big seven, whichever vote, the four that are investing $500 billion in the data centers, have they exaggerated the expectations and got it wrong that there's going to be this massive job reduction and they're just anticipating it? Or alternatively, is AI as a whole not going to live up to expectations, but only have some small result, in which case there could be an AI market crash. So all these things are sort of rather uncertain for Trump at the moment. So, the recipe that has always been when you're, in uncertain domestic economic waters, have a war. Venezuela, Iran, who knows? I mean, which way it would go. Probably Venezuela, it looks like, in the coming future.
I just wanted to continue a bit on the tech war. You mentioned that it's likely a bubble which could begin to collapse. It does seem to me, though, that China would have some more advantages in terms of finding some implementations for its AI technologies, given that it has all these massive industries and all the scaling opportunities, that there's more places for it to use the AI. But I heard this argument before, though, that the American AI, at least, that they could be in a bubble. But how do you assess this? Why? I guess why do you see a bubble in in the AI?
Well, first of all, because just I think yesterday there was a seminar or something in London, and the CEO of NVIDIA said, it's quite clear China is going to win the AI race. I mean, and that came from the CEO of NVIDIA. And Altman, who is OpenAI, was saying to the Wall Street Journal, I think we need to have the US government back our loans to get some guarantees on our loans. I mean, the huge investment that has gone into it. I mean, at the moment, the revenues look paltry, 3% or less. People are not taking it up. And as I say, the MIT study showed that 91% of companies had got no good results from it. In other words, they're not going to spend a lot of money on AI. And indeed, they have shown, I mean, these are live tests, not hypothetical ones, that actually the companies found it was cheaper and better to get humans to do the job because there were many mistakes. AI has hallucinations. What a wonderful way of putting it. Has hallucination. It can give bad data. It can actually plagiarize and use data that it shouldn't. All these things that are causing problems. But I mean, the amount of investment in these data centers is has been, perhaps exaggerated. It's huge, and the question is, where's the revenue going to come from this? And what happens if Huawei comes up with a smaller, cheaper, better chip, as I think it is quite likely. And in fact, I believe I have no evidence, but from what I've seen is that, when China, sort of says they're fine without NVIDIA chips, they don't want them. It's probably because the Huawei is moving quite rapidly in the other direction. In fact, I see there are some sort of photographs and things that show massive expansion of Huawei technical laboratories and big things going on. There's obviously something massive going on there. So this whole thing could pop because you remember with DeepSeek, the AI, it sort of undermined a lot because they were doing this open source. So you didn't even have to pay for it. I mean, you could use it without paying rent on. But the whole idea of America has been, to monopolize the data and to monopolize the whole process. But it's not clear that that's satisfactory, partly because the data is nearly all Western. I mean, most of the data that they've been using is Western. And, for the rest of the world, they're saying, well, we don't want an Orientalist type of AI given to us. We would like something that is wider and more diverse. So I'm not sure that this is an open question. Is it going to work, and who will actually reap the benefit? And what you said is exactly right. China is geared up to use it in a practical, cheap, and effective way, and the West is not.
I want to circle back to Russia because I do think that when Trump came to power, a lot of the Russians seemed cautiously optimistic, at least, that the past 30 years of failing to agree on a common security architecture for Europe, that for the first time they actually had an American president who spoke a bit warmly about Russia. Furthermore, beyond this, perhaps even overcoming the past century of bad relations with the United States. Again, maybe that would be too optimistic, but nonetheless, there seemed to be some hope about the Trump presidency. But now that the diplomacy isn't really progressing, you mentioned yourself that Trump suddenly came back asking for a ceasefire. I mean, the whole achievement of Alaska was that that they took the ceasefire off the table. But now he's back at the ceasefire. He's back at doing threats of, well, not just threats. He's actually putting sanctions.
Because he wasn't allowed to. I mean, it was quite clear the way it was just suddenly cancelled. Someone told him, Rubio or whoever the messenger was, said, I'm sorry, but those that are above Trump in this hierarchy of control were not allowed. Said you're not allowed to dismantle, the deep architecture of the United States, architecture that has been in place for 4 decades. And part of that architecture is about Israel, and part of that architecture is about weakening Russia and eventually the needs of the Europe and the West to have ownership access to Russian resources. So that's the deep architecture. So you had, in a sense, Trump sort of battling his head, and he was told no. And Rubio, I think, was pretty clear about that. That is that is the position, and I think that. So I think Russia was always cautious, not allowing it to get overexcited about it. But they listened hard, carefully, to what Trump was saying about, and Rubio, about, a new multi-polar order, and thought they'd like to hear about it. And then there were the talks, and Witkoff came and went. But what happened? I mean, what was clear, and this underlines what I say to you, that, it was never in prospect, is, as Ribkov said, there was no progress at all in the very basic elements, the first principles of relationship building. There was nothing done about the return of their consulates and diplomatic premises, nothing advanced on sort of exchange of flights across the nothing of the sort of very first steps that any government would take that was serious about a new relationship were taken. Nothing. And that was what was reported back to Putin. Look, there's no sign of anything taking place. And, you put a lot. I remember when I was dealing with the Oslo courts and I was in Israel at the time, I looked around for signs that Israel was preparing for a two-state solution. And there weren't any. The opposite, in fact. Water, electricity, everything was being built about a two-state outcome, not one state. So you pay attention to these little signs. And so I think that's why, the point of the Anchorage meeting, from the perspective of the Russians, was really to test and find out, does Trump have any room for maneuver? Does he have a mandate from his donor card to do this or not? And the answers come back, and that was confirmed again by this recent visit by Dmitry, who came to the U.S. last week, Kirill Dmitry, who came and reported back and said, no, there's no room for maneuver. There's no room for maneuver. He hasn't got that ability to move. And so now the Russians have wound up that whole process, effectively. Doesn't mean it's irreversibly wound up, but they've wound it up. No one's pursuing that. They are just pursuing the military outcome in Ukraine and preparing themselves for the expected escalation, because they think there will be escalation. And the question is, what type of escalation? And if it's right into the depths of Russia, then that will carry consequences. and there will be a response, I believe. Yes, people say, oh, yes, but they haven't responded when red lines have been crossed. I think I may be wrong, but from all I hear, this is, to fire Tomahawk missiles into St. Petersburg and Moscow. It's just not acceptable. And they will react in one way or another. Doesn't mean we're in a nuclear war, because they have Oreshin, which is a conventional missile, but has the same sort of capabilities as a tactical nuclear weapon. But yes, I think that's so everyone is preparing for it. I don't think the sanctions, you asked me, I don't think the sanctions, I think the sanctions, some people say they don't mean anything, but I don't think it's true. I think they are an aggravation, but I don't think they're a critical issue. Russia was planning for that, expected it, and taking various precautions in that respect. And so I don't think it's a game changer, the sanctions. And I don't think they'll be observed by China or India or other states. Because there is now bad blood between the BRICS and America, if you like, and I don't think they'll accept it, and China certainly won't. So I don't think the sanctions will make a difference. I don't think, I don't see much scope for escalation. I know the European establishment is agog to have some sort of escalation with Russia. But what are they going to do? I think the best they can do is to try and create a publication in the Baltic Sea or something like that. Yeah, because there's that very narrow channel that, vessels have to sail. Off Estonia with their rocks in the middle of it, to try and get some sort of provocation in order to bring Americans in and thereby sort of prove, we told you so, Russia is a threat to Europe. Of course, it's not true, but, it's good politics. If you've got a defeat in Ukraine and you've got a hold together the European Union, what other flag can you fly other than to say, oh, well, it's all Russia's fault. Russia, Russia, Russia. And it's rather crude and it's not really working. But, I think they just feel there's no alternative but to sort of try and provoke and try and still push Trump into doing something. I do think, when I say that I think he's been told not to, but I do think his instincts are that he doesn't want to start a real war with Russia, because, that is not going to be good for his MAGA base at all. They won't like that one bit. And more than just the Republican MAGA base, nor will young Americans as a whole. They don't want to see, more wars. And so I think he has at least that sort of intuition that don't escalate too far. I mean, Jeff, do what you have to, but don't escalate too far. Maybe wrong. He talked about nuclear testing, but no one knows what that means. I mean, the Russians have tried asking his own people, what does that mean? I mean, what do you mean testing and nuclear testing? And I don't know that it means anything. It's rather like saying, well, we're going to sail those subs off your coast. I mean, what did that mean? Meant nothing. They already had 2 submarines, probably on, Edge's submarines sort of sitting on the bottom of the sea off Russia. Of course they do. But I mean, so what? Where does that take you? Is this going to give you the leverage that Kellogg keeps talking about? We need to have pressure on Russia. They'll collapse under pressure. Well, they haven't, and I don't see any signs of it at the moment. Actually, the collapsing is coming from the Ukrainian side.
Well, this is why I feel we're entering this dangerous period because as Ukraine is now, well, the collapse appears to be intensifying. Uh, the two things are happening. One, it would be that the NATO, then especially the Europeans, as you suggested, are becoming more geared towards, I guess, reversing this collapse and rescuing the situation. But this, manifests itself in horrible suggestions. For example, the former NATO Secretary General suggested, I think it was only yesterday, that NATO should start intercepting Russian missiles and planes in Ukrainian airspace. They should look towards sending more long-range weapons. So different forms of escalation. Meanwhile, on the Russian side, we see that it seems, at least to me, that the patience of Putin has come to an end. They realize that they have to restore their deterrent, and indeed, a lot of the posturing lately seems to, yeah, affirm this. So it just seems, yeah, this would be a very
I
dangerous
think you're,
situation. Sorry?
I think you're absolutely right about how you're reading of the situation. The only thing I would add is that, I think when I mentioned the sort of Baltics as the sort of locus, it's really because, I mean, they want it, they don't have the capacity to do a big operation to force, a provocation against Russia that will immediately bring in America, because we in Europe don't have the forces for that. We don't have the money, and we don't have, if you like, the armory that is available for anything other than a skirmish with Russia. So what I think they're hoping to do is more or less have a sort of skirmish, either in the air or, I don't know, somewhere along that border, or at Odessa, which seems to be sort of for the which Macron seems to be obsessed. But something like that, in order to try, I think, because Europe is so desperate in its circumstances, economic circumstances, its political circumstances, that they really feel, the need, as I say, to sort of wave the flag of Russophobia, because without the Ukraine, that was the sort of unifying thing, that the glue that kept the European Union together. If the Ukraine issue is no longer an issue, you'll find this country, Italy and France and the Mediterranean countries, changing, I think, quite strongly in wanting to have a relationship with Russia. Many of them, maybe not all of them, partly because they need it. I mean, in terms of economics, they need resources and cheaper energy. So I think will be, and Germany, as you know, is sort of pivoting very obviously with a significant sector, demanding a relationship with Russia, and demanding that they negotiate for direct pipeline gas to Germany to restore its business model, which is broken and which is getting worse and worse. The recession in Germany is getting incrementally worse. So I think, you know, we have to sort of aim off for the hyperbole and for the talk, uh, and understand it as the sort of, you know, of more of a sort of, cry of desperation. We've got to find something to keep this program together. We bet so much on Ukraine, put so much money in, and then uh, to that end, made so many mistakes in our relationship with the United States, with China, economic mistakes. That now, Europe, we are in a terrible fix, and there is no way out. And I think Europe, which has, relied very much on this idea, uh, and it comes from the war, that that they can cry the need for cordon sanitaire so that only the center parties are allowed to win in Europe by saying, oh, no, no, no. I mean, you remember, Hitler came in this way and we can't allow this to happen. We've got to keep all the right out and extreme left out of this and just have us in the middle. But, young Europeans, I mean, don't remember that end of the war. It's not something that's sort of at the front of their thinking anymore. And, they are not, the Europeans talk about conscription in the army. They talk about that here. Absolutely no wish to see, the young, culturally, they are not in that way at all. I mean, you only have to look at Europe to see it's culturally, not in the military frame of mind at all. So I think that the Europe is trying to find some way of keeping itself together, of pulling all the pieces. But we should not. And I think, this is a trouble that some in Russia do, I think, take the worst interpretation. And they talk about, but Germany's massively rearming, starting an army. That's what they say. Do you have the statistics? I don't, but I think, we're talking about they're spending something like 25, 35 billion. The 700 billion never seemed to materialize in debt instruments. It seemed to be, it just didn't work. And in any case, the Bundesbank the Parliament would not accept to vote for that form of debt. So do we have a sense of how real this talk of, remilitarization is? I mean, we're starting from a very low level anyway. I mean, look at, the UK or France. I mean, it's the very basics that have gone missing and all broken and are not there. How many men could we amass? Well, so I'm told by those NGOs that specialize in this, that Europe could put maybe 25, 35,000 men at a time on the front. I mean, that would cover a tiny part of such a large contact line. I mean, it's not, this is not sort of a serious stuff. I mean, look how many America had mobilized nearly 1.5 million for Iraq war. These are figures miles away from what Europe can do. So I think, a little bit of this is possibly exaggerated. But nonetheless, I mean, we should take it with some concern and to take it seriously, because they might still do something stupid and start a war with Russia, even if that isn't really their full intent, because they're not going to be able, they'll lose a war if they start one with Russia. But, they want to keep the narrative up. They want to keep the fear up. And so, all these announcements, we may be at war this year. We may be at war immediately. They could attack. Britain has put up an emergency hospital and France has done the same. I mean, it's redolent of the COVID. I mean, Operation Fear. Different in this case because it's, Russia, but the virus is Russia. And the sort of the fear of it and how we will still take precautions is rather similar. We call that, I seem to recall, in the UK, that is called nudge politics, which is a polite way of saying psyops.
Yeah, well, there seems to be a thought in Moscow, though, that they can outlast the West in some ways.
They can. Oh, they cannot. I missed which word you used. They can outlast or
No, that they can. Well, when I say outlast, I mean in terms of the military advantage going in their favor. The European economy is sinking, but also, as you suggested, the political stability, because You mentioned the center warning about the left and right, but often now in Europe we see that we have a radical center instead. That is, often it's the left and right that are talking about peace, while it's the center which is talking about essentially war on Russia. But Western politics seems increasingly, hell bent on keeping the war going. The entire political system appears to become more broken, as you suggested. When it's seen as being dangerous to hand over political power to the opposition, then voting becomes a bit like writing a letter to Santa Claus. You're not going to be able to, actually achieve anything. So, do you see the politics in Europe becoming so broken to the extent that I guess the system begins to fragment, not collapse of states, but to the point where NATO or EU or something can begin to dissolve?
Yes, I do, because I think that there is a huge structural, if you like, geological fracture of the system. Because we talk about the European economy or the American economy, but it's a misnomer. There's not one economy, there are two economies. One economy has grown rich in financialization. I call that the cornucopia economy, which is for the top 10%. And we can argue if it's 20% or 10%, whatever, it doesn't matter. But there is a cornucopia, if you like, economy. And then there is the privation, the one that has suffered structural, if you like, attrition. I mean, in terms of jobs and in terms of the structure, which is one in which they have become progressively impoverished. It's not just AI. It has been going on anyway. But perhaps, companies will use AI as an excuse to shed more jobs, not because they're going to replace these jobs with AI, but because they just want to cut back in the face of price increases and raw materials and everything like that. So you have these two, structurally separated economies taking place, and we are not going back. They may hope so in Europe. They may think we can go back to, the good old liberal world that had existed for 4 decades. But it's over. We're not going to go back. There's nobody who can win a genuine election rather than a gerrymandered election, either in America or Europe, on a platform of a return to globalization or DEI type platform. Is gone. There are new forces. Young people are angry. They don't have money. They can't live properly. In America, I saw that the age at which, generally young Americans first can buy their starter home has risen to 37. That's hugely significant. It's hugely significant for women, if not for men, that they can't start a family until they're in their 40s, if they can. So, there's a lot of this underneath it. So when you ask me about war and other things, I would say to you, it can't happen because they don't trust the European leadership. I'm talking about, if you like, the privation economy. They don't trust it. They don't believe in it. They don't like the establishment. They're not going to go to war for it. What are they going to go to war for? For the other economy, for the financialized economy, where the stock market, we all know it's manipulated. If you have the right contacts, you can get leverage, you can get credit, you can buy when the markets are going up, inevitably day after day after day after day, because the Federal Reserve is pumping them up. How do you lose money? You can't really. So all of this you have sort of manipulated sphere, and then you have the real sphere. And I think that the leadership of Europe, the establishment, have lost an understanding of that reality. They think somehow they are going to be able to sort of lean back into their sofas and, oh, that's right, then we'll be back to normal. Trump may lose the midterms and then everything will go back to as it was. I've heard them say this. This is what they say. And I just think they are um, uh, complacent is a little too polite for you know. They're living in a sort of little um, retort, a sealed retort of that. Well, what was wrong with the technocracy? What was wrong? Well, it was dysfunctional. It didn't work. It didn't give people what they need: jobs, a place to live, medical help. All these things, bread and butter politics, didn't come into their calculations of the technical needs of the future. So this is the point, really. One of the things always in the past people have identified. You need to feed people, and you need to give some care for them. But if there's no trust, they're not going to go and fight you. No.
Well, no, that seems about right. This idea that they can simply wait out Trump, as they did in the first administration. But that also applies to Russia. The idea that if they can just prolong the war a little bit longer, then Russia might collapse, or something would happen. Something will come along to rescue the situation. But all of this, as you said, retreating into hope and imagination, it results then in a failure to adjust to these new realities, and indeed adjust to the new world. As you described, the rise of China now is coming very, very quickly. Uh, but just as a final question, very, I guess, open, what does this world look like? How do you think things will change in the years to come? Because given, well, we can go with the assumption that we're losing the war in Ukraine. The Chinese appear to be winning the economic war with the United States, and the new economic forces are reshaping the old system. What is it that you expect to see?
Well, what I think is that China, as it has demonstrated very clearly in two spheres, its position. First of all, there was that extraordinary military parade that took place, I think, on the 80th anniversary of the victory over Japan, which really shocked many Americans and Europeans. I mean, it was extraordinary. I mean, not only the absolute precision, but the weapons and the whole structure sent a ripple of anxiety through America. And I think that's had some effect in terms of the Pentagon now saying, well, perhaps we, shouldn't think of taking on China militarily because we don't have any more of that capacity. And I think the other thing is really, although, I mean, if you listen to Besant, it's called the Besant, the Treasury Secretary, I mean, saying, oh, well, China was totally, we won everything in it. That's not the impression of the rest of the world or others. They know that China has the leverage. They know that China played that leverage and got what it wanted. It doesn't just dominate in rare earths. Has an absolute advantage there, in that it's not just the raw earths, of which they have about 70% of global raw earths, but they also have a large position in the machinery that is needed to extract it, and even more refining process, where they are at 93% control of global position. So everyone can see that all this hyperbolic sort of exaggeration that comes out of some officials, but I mean, percent has been particularly obvious in recent days. I mean, where he's saying the American economy is great, there's no inflation, the jobs are growing. I mean, patently, this is just not true. I'm not quite sure. I mean, I know confidence building is supposed to be, something that is important, but ultimately it can be counterproductive. And I think they've reached the point of it being probably counterproductive. So China is going to continue in this position. And I think what is obvious, though, is that what I said before, the outcome of the recent elections and the prospects for the midterms, the thing that Trump has got to try and fix is the economy, prices down. I mean, it's not, I mean, the fact that he has been so close to Israel has turned out not to be a winning issue. Nor is, if you like, telling everyone he's put so much money in AI and we're going to dominate it. Because the mega base, the AI, is essentially Orwellian and sinister. So, I mean, the only thing he can do, and this is the same for the Europeans, although I'm not sure that that they really understand. The people who will win the elections in the future are the ones that can convince ordinary working sort of the second half of what I call the second half of the spectrum, the other half of the spectrum, that they have a plan that will provide well-being, jobs, healthcare, schools, and all these things to that people. Anything else, promising them globalization and promising them AI, promising something else, I don't think will work. Will say how close they are to Israel. Will that persuade MAGA? Will that persuade the young people? I don't think it will. Now Europe doesn't seem to grasp it. Nor does America. And I just want to underline, I'm not saying he's losing and will lose midterms election. I'm not saying you can never say that about Trump because look how people have said he's over and he's finished so many times and he pushes back. But still, this I think is an essential truth. And the only people, Democrats or Republicans, who will actually get a mandate and prevail in an election will be the ones that can credibly, underline, credibly convince young Americans, particularly 25 to 30-year-old, 5-year-olds, that they have a solution to their joblessness and to their inability to afford housing and also to afford medical care and other elements. Without this bread and butter economics, I think it's going to be very difficult. And don't forget, the Democrats have their populists too. I mean, it's not just on the Republican, on the MAGA side. I mean, many young Democrats voted this last election for Trump precisely because they thought he was going to bring back jobs to America, and that they believed it. And I think what we saw this week in the election was a reflection of some disillusion. Prices are rising. The standard of living of these people is getting desperate. We have all of the leading companies calling out what they say a consumer confidence crisis across the board in the younger age group, particular. Fast food establishments are saying 40% drop in attendance. Supermarkets saying even the basic staples of life are not selling and are being left on the shelf. People are maxed out. They don't have the money for these things. They don't have the money even to go to to buy the hamburger any longer. This is really serious. This what you're saying. And then when you see the graph showing, the wealthy just money pouring in and job openings declining like that, you're coming close to insurrection. If you can't change the situation um, by protest, and your protests are just ignored, if you can't change the situation by voting because you have to vote for Tweedledum or Tweedledee, then where do you turn? If you're really at your wit's end and on the edge. And that's where I think both Europe and America has to watch out. It's becoming very, very volatile. Look at Britain, look at France. It's the explosive material that's explosive. And the structural, if you like, fault line is so severe. If you can't, I mean, the idea that that can be just changed in the elections one is wishful thinking. It would, to change the whole structure away from the debt consumer-led model that we've had since the war. I mean, you're an economist. It would take 2 decades at least to really, if there was the political will and to take on the entrenched interest to do that, because the entrenched interest was certainly fight tooth and nail against any change to the structural economy, which has benefited them, bountifully.
I think all these problems will likely become worse after the war because once you don't have that distraction anymore, it's a lot of the political leadership we have would have to come up with some solutions to the problem which have been festering away. So,
Yeah.
anyways, thank you so much for taking the time. And as I said at the beginning, please go visit Conflicts Forum in Substack and check out the link in the description. So thank you so much again for taking time.
Well, thank you for the invitation.